Torture has been used throughout history as a means of getting information, revenge, or scaring enemies into submission. Some of these devices may be considered as a step too far though. Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle was a pyramid-shaped cradle which would see the victim completely naked and sat on top of a pyramid. Ropes would be tied around the victim which would slowly pull the victim down onto the pyramid. If this wasn't humiliating enough, the point of the pyramid would be forced up an orifice. You can probably guess which one. They were sat on it. The pressure caused by the ropes pulling down on the victim would see their flesh begin to tear, opening wounds which could succumb to infection. The pyramid was rarely, if ever, clean, so the likelihood of death caused by infection was extremely high. If the infection didn't get you, however, the simple fact of being impaled on a pyramid-shaped structure would be all too much for someone to withstand. Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden is a metal or wooden cabinet with a hinged door on the front of it. The door would house spikes on the inside to impale any victim who was sentenced to this grisly end. The Iron Maiden is said to be of Germanic invention, somewhere around the 14th century. The victim would be placed in the upright sarcophagus-shaped box and would stay there until the spikes penetrated them and they succumbed to death. Thumbscrew. The thumbscrew is a vice-like device which often includes studs or spikes on the insides of the grips. A victim's finger or toes would be held inside the vice's grip until they were completely crushed, or in some cases, severed off completely. As you can imagine, the spikes and studs used would either impale or crush the victim's digits, further increasing their discomfort and pain. The device was first used in medieval Europe, most notably as part of the cargo in the Spanish Armada. The devices were intended to be employed as an argument to convince the heretics which opposed them. Larger versions of the thumbscrew were also created, designed to crush knees and elbows, and an even bigger one, named the Head Crusher, was supposedly also deployed to inflict the injuries you'd expect it to, the crushing of skulls. The device was still in use as late as the 18th century, with documentation of it being used against slaves. They would employ it on the slave ships to control the desperate atmosphere aboard the ships. This allowed for a good argument for the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire, and eventually the end of the slave trade altogether. Tongue Terror. It doesn't take a genius to work out what the tongue terror was designed for. To be used in conjunction with a device to force your mouth open, the tongue terror would be inserted in the mouth and clipped onto the tongue. The screw would then be tightened to clamp down on the victim's tongue, but without slicing through it. The device would then be roughly pulled out of the victim's mouth, tearing a large chunk of the tongue out as well. This was an extremely painful form of torture, and the initial injury wouldn't be enough to kill someone. It's a definition of torture, pain without death. The shock a victim would go through may be enough to knock them out. If so, lucky them. The rapid blood loss means that death would be a comfort, which would quickly follow, and if that didn't get you, the infection of the open wounds would. Breast Ripper. Feminists don't fear, we have a torture device especially for women. The Breast Ripper, nicknamed the Spider, was used against women who had committed crimes such as adultery, self-abortion, and witchcraft. The device was made of iron and was often heated and fixed to the wall. The device would be imposed onto a single breast of the victim at a time. The woman would then be suddenly pulled back by the torturer. The massive injury from the spikes would horribly disfigure and tear off the breast of the victim. The torture would often be carried out in front of the women's children to worsen the torture, easily scarring the children for life, as well as their mother. The likelihood of death from this torture was obviously high, due to massive blood loss or infection, but if a victim did somehow survive, they would be terribly disfigured for life. Let me know what other torture devices you think should have been included on the list. Please do like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.